Welcome to Work in Progress, Conversations with Creators. I'm your host, Logan Royce Beitman. On today's program, I have with me Priyanka Kumar, who wrote a book called The Light Between Apple Trees that she'll be showcasing at the Santa Fe International Literary Festival coming up. And it's a really exciting exploration of apples, what they mean all around the world. We had a great conversation about nature and reconnecting with it. I hope that you enjoy.
If you enjoy our podcast, please like and subscribe and consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal to help us bring you more content like this. You can find this episode and all of our podcasts on the Albuquerque Journal website, abqjournal.com, as well as YouTube, iTunes, and Spotify. See the show notes for a discount code on a digital subscription. Thank you for supporting the Albuquerque Journal, New Mexico's leading news.
So Priyanka, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Logan. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, and you've done a lot of things. I think you're mostly known as a writer, but you've also made documentaries. You're a naturalist. You often write about the natural world. And I guess we should start off with your book, Light Between Apple Trees. And
That's right.
so this, but well, first of all, how long have you been kind of investigating apple trees?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like I've been investigating apple trees since I was a toddler living in the heart of the apple growing region in the Himalayas. And
Right.
I was wandering through these trees in my daily life, and I experienced them as these beings, these mother beings that towered over me. And I experienced the pull, the magic. I, of course, couldn't unpack it. And it wasn't until I would say the pandemic when I was already, as a naturalist, I hike all the time, but during the pandemic, it went into overdrive. And I was hiking in areas that I hadn't been previously familiar with. And I found myself stumbling into these older, historic, abandoned, in some cases, abandoned orchards, and seeing wild apple trees, feral apple trees. I experienced that pull again that I had as a child, and from time to time during the course of my life, during my school years and college years, and later, it would come back to me, those memories from those orchards, and specifically one orchard that my dad had taken me to, that would come back to me. But during the pandemic, just viscerally being in these orchards and spending time, I just felt like this was an important part of my life. And I needed to unpack this. And the deeper I went into it, I realized it wasn't just an important part of my life, it's an important part of the history of this country. And so it was almost astonishing to realize how much you can understand through the lens of the apple tree. So that got me really excited, and I just went full steam ahead.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I do want to get back to those kind of childhood memories as well, which I think are so important. But it is interesting, and as we're celebrating the 250th anniversary, I guess, of the Declaration of Independence, and people are thinking about the history of our country, it is interesting to look at it through something like an apple. It seems so innocuous in a way, but it's like you say, you can sort of trace so much history through it. So what makes the apple such a quintessential American fruit?
Yeah, so we talk about our founding fathers all the time. One of the things we don't realize is how much they were into growing things, into growing fruit trees. I mean, I went to Charlottesville, Virginia as a fellow for a little while there to research Jefferson's historic orchards. Now, Jefferson is a very fraught figure, and rightly so.
Sure.
But what I was focusing during my time as a fellow at the Center for Historic Plants and the Center for Jefferson Studies are these old apple trees, and in some cases we've lost, and actually in a lot of the cases we've lost those trees, but a real attempt has been made to grow some of those old varieties, like the Newtown Pippin, one of the oldest varieties in the country. And I have to say that you know, a lot of the founding fathers, Jefferson, John Adams, George Washington, they were really into growing fruit trees. And John Adams was so deeply into it that he was, you know, not just growing the trees, but looking very deeply into the compost that he was going to add. And he's a wonderful founding father to talk about because he was the only one of the lot who didn't have slaves.
Hmm.
So both John and his wife Abigail Adams, and that's a beautiful love story. Were deeply into their garden, and in fact, Abigail once said that she prefers um, the doings of her garden to being in there were some toxic happenings in the British court because he was John Adams was the U.S. ambassador to Britain at the time. So it was, I feel like growing fruit trees was something grounding for them. I mean, it was something that was deeply a part of their lives. Not only were often at meal times, you ended a meal with a fruit. I mean, that's how people kind of kept their teeth clean.
Right.
At a time when, dentistry was pretty minimal, I would say. But also, cider was a huge part of American life right from the get go, from the time that the settlers came, because the water was a little brackish, not always healthy to drink. But you could make cider even out of apples that were spitters. And John Adams, for instance, had this habit of he wouldn't dream of starting his day without a jill of apple cider. So so in every way, as a drink, as something to eat, as something to do, as a grounding force, these fruit trees were an important part of the lives of the settlers who came here from all kinds of different countries. And in many, many, many cases, they brought seeds in their pockets. And it's the
Hmm.
first thing that they did before they even started to build structures. They planted those seeds, those apple seeds, and watch the tree grow. So it was, um, I would say that it was an essential part of the culture and the character of those people who came here and were, putting a home together. Planting those apple seeds was an important part, and not just the settlers who came to the east, but we're here in the Southwest. So the Spanish conquistadores who came also brought apple seeds with them, and planted them along the way, along the trails that they took. So and the ones that were nurtured grew up into these mature, beautiful apple trees, and in some cases, we still have apple trees that are older than you would imagine, perhaps from the 17 or the 1800s, and it's kind of astonishing to think that these were planted by people who came here from Spain. I mean, there's a whole history behind these trees. So my investigations kept taking me deeper and deeper, and I found myself um, trying to investigate the apple tree, but really gaining insights into culture, science, history. And it was an astonishing journey. And finally, I realized that I would like readers to experience some of the richness that I had.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, and you live out here in New Mexico now.
Yes, I'm in
Um,
Santa Fe.
yeah. How long have you been in New Mexico?
So I've been here about, I would say, 18 years. So I
Yeah,
do look at
yeah.
this as my home. And, I see it's been really funny because after the book came out, I was interviewed by people from the East Coast, and almost every single one of them says that, well, I love apples and I love apple trees, but I didn't, I don't see, I never thought that apple trees grew in New Mexico.
Right.
So people look at us as this, and we are such a dry, arid place. And yet, and this is what I think is really interesting. And yet, um, you know, both the Spanish conquistadors, but also the wonderful indigenous communities living here became caretakers of these apple trees. And so we have a
Yeah.
rich apple heritage right here in the Southwest. Um, and it's something truly to be celebrated.
Yeah, no, it's exciting, and I think, I'm a fairly recent transplant. I just came here about a year and a half, 2 years ago. I was born in Florida where, like, I knew that apples were kind of the quintessential fruit, but it wasn't really for us. We had oranges and mangoes and things like that. Like, I guess maybe, similar to what you would have, like, in South India versus North India,
Right.
I guess, And, then I don't think I saw an apple tree until I went to school in New York, and there were apple trees all over and orchards, so, um but anyway, now I'm out here, and I'd love to taste some of the these apples, these, like, kinda heirloom varieties. So people that are listening, I mean, they should all read your book, but in the meantime, what are some apples that you would recommend, for New Mexicans?
One of the things that I do is I avoid supermarket apples, especially when it's around harvest time. And so what I do is I go to some favorite orchards. We have this great culture. We have dedicated orchardists in New Mexico, wonderful orchards in places like Chimayu, Dixon, Velarde. So I go to my favorite orchardists and ask them what's going on. One of the apples that people here in New Mexico really recommend is the Jonathan. And
Mm,
interestingly, the Jonathan is kind of like a red apple, like a ball. It's been called the essence of the American apple. And I've had more than one enthusiastic orchardist say to me that, the Jonathan's the best. And boy, they're on to something. It has this complex flavor. And one of the things that happens is if you get used to supermarket apples, and, there are just a very few varieties, and a lot of those apples are, I call them lab apples. They're engineered.
mm,
You get used to this kind of like the sugar hit. It's really, it's just like they're pushing the sugar aspect of the apple, but the apple has this really complex taste. And there could be savory notes, and there could be notes of cinnamon
yeah,
and or saffron. It's just beautiful to experience the Jonathan apple. Also like the Baldwin, which is so refreshing. I mean, it wakes you up on a sleepy fall morning, I would say. And then there are the apples that are visually they're stunning, like the Hidden Rose. And I have yet to find a kid who didn't crack a big smile when I cut open that apple, because it's kind of like a little slightly greenish apple on the outside. But when you cut it open, it's all pink inside. It's
yeah,
unbelievable.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so cutting open apples for kids, there's the giant Russian, which is actually like a tie-dye red inside. And allowing kids to experience the magic of all these wonderful varieties. I mean, there was a time when we had 16,000 name varieties in America
right,
alone. And now, scarcely a fifth of those varieties are really out there in any meaningful way. And out of those varieties, the average person just comes into contact with a handful of varieties in the supermarket. So I feel like there's this whole world out there, and you start to explore apple trees, frankly, and then um, at least for me, I realized that some of these feral trees were growing in areas that I named the microwild. So I developed this concept of microwild in the book, and these are fragments or scraps of nature, which are still large enough, still rich enough to sustain plant and animal biodiversity. And these are the places where you might see you might see some kind of signs that a bear has gone through, and perhaps that bear, through its scat, has planted a couple of magical feral apple trees. So
Yeah.
that became, for me, a real opening in the book. So it is certainly there's a focus on apple trees, but I also focus on what these microwilds are and how they can perhaps at a time when a lot of us live these lives that are so digital in a sense, so cocooned in technology. And I feel that these microbials have the potential to reconnect people to nature. And that's become something that I have been pursuing as a concept, and as something real, of course, more than a concept, even beyond writing this book.
Yeah, no, I think, oftentimes when we think about nature, we think about these large wilderness areas, national parks, and these kind of, which are obviously important and we need to protect them. But the micro wilds, it's something that's a little bit more approachable. And the idea that even if you are living in a urban or suburban environment, there may be opportunities to cultivate or allow wild um, biomes to emerge around you, right?
Absolutely. And yeah, it goes without saying that those wilderness areas are important, but unfortunately, not everybody has access to those wilderness areas. And, vast majority of Americans are living in urban areas now. And so for those people who've gotten cut off, how do you reconnect those populations to the natural world? How do you reconnect, people who have young children? How do you reconnect elderly people to the natural world? And I think that's where this concept that I developed, the microwild, I feel like there's a very strong potential here. And I think that all of us, no matter whether we are in Santa Fe or Albuquerque or somewhere else, perhaps have a microwild that's not too far away from where we live. And sometimes all it is an arroyo, perhaps. But
Yeah.
some animals go through and some wonderful native plants are growing. So getting to know our microwilds, I feel like it's a first step. And then because these microwilds are approachable because they're close to us. Unfortunately, they're also under tremendous development pressures, and so I feel like once we get to know and value the microwilds around us, we want to preserve, we want to conserve those areas. We want to make sure that they're not built over, because we appreciate the plants and the beautiful trees that are growing there, and some gorgeous bird might go by that might steal our heart. So
Right, yeah.
this is something that I'm going deeper into right now, and am getting more and more excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one thing that's wonderful about your writing in this book and other things you've written, you tend to bring the personal into a conversation with these larger themes and ideas, some people write kind of, I don't know, more academic, solely academic books about nature or the ecology and but I think the personal touch and those personal stories are what's gonna that's what makes it interesting and meaningful for I think for a lot of people, a lot of your readers, and I guess how did you end up kind of um coming to write in that way?
Well, that's a great question. So two things. I think storytelling was always very important to me, and I wanted to. So storytelling was something that I was deeply into since I was a child, and nature was something I was deeply into since I was a child. So I think, in a sense, it was an organic process to marry both of those things that were dear to me. And I do think that at a time um, when all of us are facing two crises. connected to the natural world, which is the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis at the same time. I think it's very important that the average person becomes engaged, and the average person starts to care about this. And so, what I wanted to do is tell stories about the natural world and why we should care about the natural world. I don't want my writing to just be kind of like a litany of statistics about what we're
Right.
losing. And I do have a little bit of that in there. Um, and yet, I think it's important for me to really take my readers on a journey and allow
Yeah.
them to experience the riches that I experience living life in the way that I do. And there's also you know, because I grew up in these really wild areas in the Himalayas, um, I became um, comfortable with nature very early on. I saw myself as a part of nature. And unfortunately, not everybody gets that kind of childhood. And so, because I had that, to this day, I feel like nature is my primary home. And so I feel that um, I have a way of seeing the world that is unique for many, many reasons. And if there's a way that I can transmit that to uh, to people today who are perhaps more living more cocooned lives in technology and inside, I mean, I think you know, nowadays, I believe people spend a vast majority of their time indoors. So I felt like if I could tell these stories and, just crack open little doors, little windows for people, that could only be a good thing.
Yeah, and there's so much kind of joy and pleasure, sensorial pleasures that you describe, aesthetic pleasures. The sight of an apple that you crack open, it's like tie dyed, the flavors of the apple, and I feel like your kind of understanding of aesthetic um, appreciation is really informed by rasa theory, the Sanskrit idea of like the juice or flavor, maybe essence of a thing. So maybe talk a little bit about that because this is something actually I studied years ago. I know a little bit about it, but probably a lot of people listening may not. So talk a little bit about that idea.
Yeah, so rasa means juice, literally and metaphorically. It's a Sanskrit concept. Just like in the German language, there are words that represent entire concepts. So it is with Sanskrit too. And rasa has been a foundational concept for me for a very long time. And in part, that came about because once I moved to the West, as much as I appreciated all the wonderful infrastructure that actually works, I felt that something was missing in my life.
Yeah.
And I felt that consistently, and I knew that was something real. And I wasn't able to articulate quite what it was until I started thinking more deeply about rasa, about juice. And it can sometimes rasa can mean the mood, the particular mood of a work of art, theater, song, or it can refer to the essence of a person or the essence of an experience. And I feel that even though we are blessed here in the West to have, again, such, such good infrastructure, um, our inner lives, the infrastructure of our inner lives is not always attended to the same degree. And so what I was missing was that juice, whether it was, with in friendships or just going through my day-to-day life. I was missing that sense of the spring of joy. And so I started to look at it more deeply. That was the beginning of me circling back to the wild as a young person living in the West, circling back to birds and to backpacking and hiking and experiencing that sense of rasa is very strong in nature, and it doesn't matter obviously whether you're in the east or the west. So again, with these apple trees, um, experiencing them during the pandemic, experiencing these feral or abandoned or wild historic orchards, I felt that same sense of rasa spring up within me. And I would say that you need some silence, some solitude in your life to be able to attune yourself to those moments when you truly experience rasa. And boy, when you do experience that, try to hold on to it because I feel like there's not enough of it today in modern life. It's actually not so much anymore a East or West issue. I think it's the ways in which there's um, modern life gets us to live in from the most shallow parts of us, and there are few opportunities. They're there, but there are few opportunities to go deeper. So when you get a chance to do that, when you experience rasa, hold on to it. And that's a spring. Think of it as a spring that, but it's covered over with all kinds of debris, and then your work is to move that debris away and let that spring flow more freely in your life, and then you'll notice that you are also able to um, transmit that to the people around you as well. So I don't know if any of that makes sense, but
No, I think it does, and in my understanding, I mean, I think if we think about kind of like, I don't know, like the foundations of kind of classical Western art, um, and as it developed, it was, sometimes quite dry and kind of analytical, and that people felt sort of removed from the work of art that they were analyzing. Whereas I feel like in India, it was always, and maybe it's an oversimplification, but that it was really about this sort of embodied experience and kind of expanding your mind and your senses to encompass the whatever you're appreciating, whether it's dance or an apple, right?
yeah, I
And
mean
I
it's the analytical streak is there definitely in the East. You have all your IT folks coming from there,
Right,
but
sure.
there's also a deep intuitive streak. And I think in a sense, rasa is most powerful when you're able to connect both of that, the what's analytical and what's intuitive. A lot of modern life gets us to live on the analytical level, and you can do that, and there are reasons to do that, and yet we start to feel, I mean, a lot of people these days are saying that they're starting to feel a little, and they're using this term, hollowed out inside.
Mm,
And this is kind of what I'm speaking to. And I only recently heard about this term hollowed out, but I feel like this is what my work has been consistently speaking to is you know why is it that we feel hollowed out? Why is it that we're among the richest countries in the world, and yet our inner life doesn't necessarily reflect that? And but there are ways to address this, and that's uh, one of the things that I try to address in my work, because I don't think we can just talk about nature and the biodiversity crisis, and completely separate that from what's going on in our lives. I think it
right.
all has to be connected. So I'm connecting the dots, and I think I connect a lot of dots in this book. So hopefully some of that comes across.
No, absolutely. Well, let me ask about that. I mean, um, how difficult was it to edit this book into a coherent whole? that, you know, because it's quite beautiful in the way that you've structured it, but I'm wondering what that process was like.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, one thing that really works for me is a sharp deadline. So,
Me too. I think I wouldn't be able to write anything if I didn't have deadlines here. Newspaper is
yeah.
great for me, so
So, speaking of juice, a deadline does get the juices flowing.
right.
And I had been writing this book, I would say, since some of the earlier days of the pandemic. Um, and yet, um, I was writing it mainly for myself for a little while. And then at one point, I realized that there really was a lot there. Um, I mean, Willa Cather says that sacrifice a lot of stories for one book. Like, don't be generous when you're working on a book. Don't just think that, oh, you only tell this one story. So once I realized that there were a lot of riches there were a lot of stories, and this really was in fact a book. Then I started thinking about it a little differently, and I started seeking out some specific experiences in orchards, or specific types of orchards that I hadn't yet experienced. And so with me, there's a lot of intuition involved, and I love to write in notebooks. And I let the experience chase me rather than the other way around. So when I feel like I've experienced something that really was transformative in some way, at that point I start to write about it in a notebook. And so it was a real process, I would say. It was a process of working on these experiences over the course of 5 years. And yet some of those experiences go back to my very early childhood. So
Right.
it's really, a lifelong love for these trees and for the natural world that is springing out. And in some cases, it was a matter of clearing up the debris, knowing what I wanted to be present in this book and what didn't quite belong there. Um, and then finally, when I had this hard deadline imposed on me, I think that helped me start to see the book and see how I would shape the book. It also helped to travel out of New Mexico, spending time in Virginia and Oregon and other places. And you start to see your own home and your own state in different ways. So I would say that traveling to orchards across the country was also helpful, strangely, in shaping the book. And I'm the kind of person who is writing the book and adding these details. I think part of the richness in this book comes from all the details of all the different
Yeah.
apple varieties and the tastes and all of that. And I'm doing that until the last minute. It's
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
you have to like wrench the book
Yeah, yeah. Well,
from
it turned
the
out it turned out beautifully. I do wanna ask you, you wrote a previous book about birds. I happen to love birds. I live with a canary who wakes me up every morning by flying around and singing to me, and it's a lovely, delightful way to wake up. But, we were just talking about kind of how, it's hard for people to care in a deep way about the natural world and ecology if they don't have that direct experience. But
Mhm,
then I know you've also written about how, like, you were with a community of bird watchers at one point who sometimes were so fixated on like checking off a list of birds and their personal experience, they weren't really thinking about the loss of habitat that birds were experiencing or these larger issues. So sometimes it can work the other way too, that people, even if you're going out and trying to connect in a personal way with nature, you may not make those larger connections, right?
yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, and before I wrote Conversations with Birds, which is a nonfiction book. I wrote a fiction book called Take Wing and Fly Here, which is
Mm.
set in the world of extreme competitive birding. And so it's all
Which
about,
I haven't read. I should read that one. I haven't read it yet, but
right. And there are some funny moments in there, and it's about someone doing their big year, which is seeing the most number of bird species, and in this case it was in Los Angeles County in one year, and that just completely takes over their life. And I just found it interesting. This was a new concept for me. And I came to the West as a teenager. Um, that here, even being out in nature, it's like your ego can take over that. I mean, I would have thought that that's one area where your ego can take a fine rest, and
yeah.
and you could just it's about being in nature, but then it becomes about um being in nature, but, kind of acquiring birds for my life list or my year list or what have you.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can do that. I think that's an entryway into nature. But I think if you let that rule you, then there's so much that you're not seeing. And there's so much that you're not experiencing. And I was hanging out with a lot of those kinds of folks for a while there in California, especially. And, we'd be zipping along to a forest and, find our green-tailed towhee and, be rude to somebody else who was hiking because we needed everything, we needed the right conditions to find our towhee, and then
Right.
zip along to, in one case, like a state prison facility because there was a specific type of sapsucker hanging out there. And then off we went again. So it's like you spent the whole day looking for birds, but you don't feel like you spend a minute in nature. And
Yeah.
so I wanted to explore what that's all about, and why why we look at birds as eye candy and not as, sentient beings um, who obviously need habitat. And
Right.
that's what they're losing. I mean, that's the crux of the matter. And I think it's a lot better for us, incidentally, when we really take the time to just be in nature without any of these devices. And people are always saying that, oh yeah, they have this cool app on their phone, and yet, in a sense, I mean, I guess it works for some people, but I personally find it counterproductive to be in a forest and have the
Yeah.
phone. And,
Yeah.
I've never owned a smartphone, and I don't miss it. And I really like to be in nature in a way that I can lose myself in that experience. And I'm seeking some solitude in nature, and I'm seeking the community of birds. And that's so enriching, that I do that, to this day. I mean, I think there's nary a weekend that passes by when I'm not in the forest, and I try to bring that into my everyday life, to the extent possible. And it's so gratifying. I mean, right now with spring migration, all kinds of interesting birds are passing through. And speaking of the green-tailed towhee, I saw one in my backyard just the other day. And so, just seeing this bird that has like kind of like a neon streak of green along
Yeah.
one of its wing bars. I mean, it was just a marvelous experience. And just yesterday, watering the apple trees and the apricot trees, seeing out of the corner of the eye that a bobcat slunk away. So experiencing this kind of magic in nature, and it doesn't have to be a big mammal. Our
Yeah.
state insect is the tarantula hawk wasp. And a couple of days back, it was so windy that one of these guys, their orange wings got blown over. And just thinking about the tarantula hawk wasp and how, it has like the most painful bite of any insect other than the bullet ant. So you don't
Okay.
want to get bit by a tarantula hawk wasp, but it's a wonderful um, and amazing creature to behold,
Yeah,
and to
from
live your
afar, I
life.
guess. You wanna see it from
What's that?
afar. You wanna see it from afar, not so close up because,
Yeah, there was one entomologist who wrote that, if by any chance you get bit by a tarantula hawk wasp, just lay down and howl.
Well, that seems like good advice. Well, thank you so much, and I hope, people, read your books and they come out to see you at the Santa Fe International Literary Festival. And I've really appreciated this. I think that, a lot of people will be inspired to kind of, go out and experience nature in a pure way because of you, so thank you for
Thank
that.
you, Logan, and I'm also looking forward to my talk on May 16th, in the afternoon at the Santa Fe Lit Fest. They're wonderful, wonderful folks, and
Yeah,
I think I'll be in conversation with a writer from Albuquerque, the amazing Laura Pascas, and so, I think
yeah.
it'll be a fun event.
Wonderful. Thank you again, really appreciate it.